Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Jaitly from New York, your cardiologist on MuniMeterHealth.com, your favorite website to educate you on human heart and its illnesses. I thank you for watching, learning, and sharing on MuniMeterHealth.com on Facebook and YouTube both. I again thank you for your continued enthusiastic interest and support that you've shown in my cause of spreading the education for free. Today's topic of discussion in this short video vignette is on a very burning subject called vulnerable plaque. This is one of the most intriguing challenges in cardiology most cardiologists have faced and are facing still. Even though we are in 2017 and come a long way in understanding how the various atherosclerotic plaques work, what causes the heart attack, what causes the stroke, and how do we identify all these conditions that lead us to offer various remedies that we can offer to our patients, including, say, stents or PCI, we call them, or cabbages or bypass surgeries, as we call them. So all of those are identifiable based on certain testings in today's life. But what makes a plaque vulnerable, we still do not know, and that is what we are going to talk about very briefly in this presentation. Let me define what an atherosclerotic plaque is first. An atherosclerotic plaque that occurs normally is situated within the intimal layer or the inner layer of the artery. The artery has three layers, just to let you know. The innermost layer is the intima, and that's where the fibrin, the platelets, and all the material that leads to the formation of the plaque, in addition to the cholesterol, which is very lipid rich, as you know, that tends to accumulate within the intimal layer. There are macrophages, or we call them the first line of soldier cells that the body has, and they tend to sort of engulf these LDL particles or the low density particles of your cholesterol. We know high amount of LDL is not good. That flows through the blood, and that leads to the plaque formation. Low HDL is also not good because that sort of makes it more prone for the lousy LDL, as we call it, to accumulate on the shoulders of this artery, if you will, and leading to these plaque formations. So over a period of time, what happens is the plaque grows and grows till there is a very, very minimal flow going through the artery, and that leads to ischemia or lack of blood supply, resulting into angina or a heart attack. Now, we know about these plaques which develop over a period of time, but there are plaques which are vulnerable and they are prone for break off from the intimal layer. Now, take for an example a plaque which is stable for a long time and all of a sudden breaks off loose and obstructs the artery. Now, that can possibly occur. So it's almost like a one-way door where the door just sort of shuts the artery totally or mostly totally or even near totally, and as a result there is no flow and this area suffers a sudden heart attack. None of the studies so far, none of the tests so far that we have seen, say a stress test, a simple stress test one performs on an individual where, say, a person shows up for chest pain evaluation to a doctor's office, will define the vulnerability of a plaque. It may define the critical nature of the stenosis, which the artery is subserving to which vascular territory the artery is supplying to. Say if it is the septal wall, if it is the anterior wall, the lateral wall, or the inferior wall. These are the various walls of the heart. So either of these walls, if they are shown to have an arterial obstruction to a nature which is critical enough to show up on a nuclear stress test, for instance, or on a stress echo, if you will, where there may be wall motion abnormalities that can occur. Those are very, very helpful to identify the arterial stenosis in that vascular territory, and one can offer either a stent or medical therapy or even a bypass. However, what makes the heart plaques or the vulnerable plaques vulnerable is still not known, because you could have a 60%, say, a hypothetical lesion and not show up on a stress test, or on any nuclear stress test. And as a result, that 60% plaque, the person will freely walk around and indulge in his or her activities from day to day. All of a sudden, that 60% lesion can become 100% or nearly 99% lesion we call it because it's an obstruction right there, and that results from a vulnerability of that plaque because of it being unstable, and that door just shuts, quote unquote, shuts the flow through the artery, and as a result no supply occurs distally, and as a result either the person will have a stroke or will have a heart attack. So the vulnerability of the plaque is very, very important. So it is bad news. Unfortunately, that is not identifiable even on a stress test. So patients may undergo stress testings routinely on a yearly basis because they have high risk, say they are smokers, or they have chest pains, or they have other hypertension, diabetes, and obesity, etc., other risk factors, or family history also. But still, a stress test or even an echo or a stress echo or a nuclear stress test is not good enough to identify the vulnerability of a plaque. And even so, even an angiogram, which is an invasive test, as we know, also does not identify the vulnerable plaque. So what will identify a vulnerable plaque? Well, that remains to be seen, because that's where the future of cardiology is heading to now. And we are looking at some way of tagging non-invasively, tagging, quote unquote, non-invasively in a nuclear fashion, where a radioisotope can go and tag that particular plaque, if you will, and it has to be lipid-rich plaque, which will identify. Now, we do not know which plaques will be identified and how critical would they be, and what will need to be done if we identify, say, several of those plaques through these arteries. Where, what will remain to be seen is how do we find a remedy to treat those. The only remedy at hand right now that the cardiologists have is to intensify the statin therapy or the cholesterol therapy in these individuals to see if we can stabilize some plaques, vulnerable plaques, or some of the pre-vulnerable plaques, as I call them. And those studies are clearly seen to help, specifically so if statins are on board with the therapy. So let's take it seriously, guys. These vulnerable plaques are very, very important, but also it's one of the most intriguing areas in cardiology even today amongst all cardiologists across the globe, and people are starting to understand this vulnerability of the plaques so interestingly. It's always a million-dollar question. How would you identify a vulnerable plaque? As I said, it's not identifiable based on a stress test, a nuclear stress test, or even an angiogram, because all these tests will show non-invasively or invasively is the intraluminal diameter of that particular artery in question, or the territory that it subserves where there might be an inducible ischemia. So those patients, of course, we can identify. A quick piece of data I want to tell you that the number of heart attacks that occur across the world, 50% of them actually show up in the emergency room and they get treated. That's the good news. The bad news is the other 40 to 50% do not show up because there is a sudden cardiac death, unfortunately. And it's those 50% of the people who do not show up into the emergency rooms or into the casualty wards across the globe. We as cardiologists are extremely concerned because we'd like to save those lives, because that's where the major interest and focus is, because significantly you can improve a survival pattern in those individuals if we can identify those vulnerable plaques in those individuals who die rather suddenly or have a coronary event, which is obviously, or a cerebral event, which may be irreversible at a certain point. So I hope you found this small piece of discussion interesting, and stay tuned for more. As I said, great stuff is happening in cardiology. I will be posting it on MuniMeterHealth.com as we go along, and keep the enthusiastic interest amongst yourself, your colleagues, your friends, your training staff, your students, and of course the patients and their families too. And please share this information with many others, because staying heart healthy is so important for all of us. Thank you. Have a good one.